Erik Beard from International Ride Training. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Attraction Pros COVID-19 video series. How are you?
You know, it's a very interesting question over the last few weeks, but I'm doing pretty well, actually. I think we finally kind of figured out how to have my entire family living in the same house 24 hours a day without stepping on each other's toes between work and school. So that's good. And IRT has been very busy right now, actually, during this whole thing, kind of in different ways than we were before. But we have stayed very, very busy and very involved with the industry. So that certainly helps.
Tell us a little bit more. What have you been doing to be involved, and what have the three of you done to keep busy?
So when this whole thing started, whatever it was now, 7 or 8 weeks ago now, I was actually in Australia working for some clients out there, and we started brainstorming, my partners and I talking with a 12 or 14-hour time difference. We were on the phone for days just trying to figure out what we could do to help out the industry. This is normally for IRT a rather slow time for us. We are gearing up for our summer at this point, but this is usually the time of year where things are pretty much done, ready for audits to begin, and we're just kind of waiting to get on the road. So we came up with an idea to do what we called our coffee chat talks, and those have been a lot of what we've been doing lately. So every Friday at 11 a.m., we do these coffee chats that really have tried to be focused on a particular facet of the pandemic or of preparations for reopening. We try to keep it pretty specific so that the conversation doesn't get into too many topics and therefore doesn't really help anybody, because we're a mile broad and an inch deep. So we try to delve into something different every single week. And those have really caught on. We've gotten some nice feedback from the folks that are on the call with us. B, it's occupied a lot of our time. We do those calls on Friday. I start working on the parts that I'm doing on Monday or Tuesday, and it takes me most of the week to get kind of ready for those. We've also been really heavily involved in helping, the industry, not just our clients, but the industry as a whole, kind of communicate with their state reopening committees. In some cases, I've been on calls with reopening committees in the Northeast through NEAPA or at the request of one of our clients. I've also been kind of working with other parks who are negotiating with their states just to try to help them understand, what the issues are that need to be presented, how to persuade those regulators who may not understand our industry that it is in fact safe for us to reopen. So I've spent a lot of time doing that. And then kind of the last thing that IRT has been doing is we took a very close look at the IROC program, our Ride Operator Certification Program, which for people who aren't kind of familiar with it, lays out normally a set of standards for ride operators to follow as they operate an attraction. We took a very close look at those and said, which of these standards are not going to work if somebody has to stay 6 feet away from a guest? And how do we modify our standard then in order to ensure that the concern for social distancing is still satisfied, but also that we maintain the very high level of ride safety that we're known for. So that took a lot of thought, a lot of discussion, both internally in the company, but also with our clients. And then we have issued over the last few weeks 4 or 5 documents to kind of walk through what a distance ride procedure may look like from a very granular standpoint. So instead of just kind of talking about a ride, we're talking about a whole document that does nothing but look at measuring children, or a whole document that looks at just checking your restraints, so that hopefully we can help the industry kind of put new procedures and policies in place that when we reopen, the guests are going to feel they're safe from exposure, and they're also safe while they're on the ride.
Erik, do you get a sense, and I know, and I've said this before, nobody has a crystal ball, but you just mentioned 2 very different things: safe from exposure, but also safe on the ride. And in the past, that's been about, checking the restraints and, maybe even making eye contact with people and kind of having interactions and letting them know that you're there to keep them safe. So what are some of those things that people can do from a distance that would help people feel safe on the ride, but also, feel safe from the disease?
Well, I think, what you can do is step up how much you're doing visibly for the guest. In other words, let the guest see everything you're doing. Sometimes we would have procedures and policies in place that I think guests don't even know about. They're there to ensure their safety. But I think now we need to emphasize some of those things that may have been previously invisible to guests, but are there to help the guests' safety, both from exposure and ride safety. So a great example of that is you may see a very different way of checking perimeter gates this year. And I think most guests probably have seen an employee walk over and push and pull on a perimeter gate and keep walking, and have not given it a second thought. This year, what you may very well see is, because we want to keep employees from touching those frequently touched surfaces, you may see guests or employees checking those gates with the tops of their feet or their knees. Rather than pushing and pulling on their hands, they'll push the gate closed with their knee and they'll pull it with their foot. It's a weird enough looking process that I think the guest might actually notice. And I think if the guest asks, we should be very upfront about it. We're trying to make sure that we eliminate to the greatest degree reasonably possible any exposure that we can. And one area of exposure is if our employee touches a surface and then, for example, touches a lap bar, there's a chance that we transfer the virus from one to the other. So let's eliminate as many touch points as we can, while also then encouraging the use of hand washing and sanitizing and that kind of thing. A lot of the discussions I've had with folks over the last few weeks have really focused on sanitizing surfaces. But the funny thing is that makes people feel better. But if you read the CDC guidance, it says very clearly surfaces are something you should pay attention to, but they're not the source of most of the problem. It's really cleaning the person, not cleaning the equipment or cleaning the surfaces. And so we're really focused on making people feel better so they can see us cleaning the surfaces, but knowing they're better by helping them clean themselves. So we've got hand sanitizers and hand washing, and we're putting those in ride spiels so that people, when they get off the ride, are directed to do the hand washing. I think that's going to help make people feel better all the way around about the whole experience. And the more that we can pull that off seamlessly and professionally, I think is really going to be important too. We've been encouraging our clients to try to do dry or soft openings, friends and family nights, to really shake the bugs out of these new procedures before the general public gets there, because we don't want anybody in the general public thinking we're making this up as we go along. And it's got to be business as much as usual as possible, and they've got to feel like we know what we're doing and we know how to protect them.
Yeah. Right. So that's a huge component of it, of the guest perception, kind of layering it in with, here's the standards, and now here's even, the extra steps of going to enhance kind of guest comfort while they're at the park, while they're on property. What about then from a risk management standpoint of looking at a guest who may contract the virus after their visit and potentially want to trace it back to their visit? Do all of these things of, what are being front and center for the guest, does that provide an advantage for the parks as well, of saying, look, we're doing everything that we are doing to minimize the risk while you're here, but you are out in public near other people who, we may or may not be able to control. And that there are those inherent risks, just like there are other risks of visiting an amusement park and all the ride signs and all that, but this could have easily have happened at Walmart or Costco or your gas station.
Right. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that my son is printing something right behind me. So there he is. Say hi, Tucker. Hello. So no, you bring up a really great point, and it's one that I do get concerned every now and then that we're losing track of, especially in our state and local authorities that seem in some cases to be shooting for no exposure, when that cannot realistically be the goal. The goal has to be, we take reasonable steps to minimize the exposure. We're never going to get rid of the exposure. We're in public. We're going to allow people from the public to come. Even if we never allow anybody from the public to come, our own employees are going to be there. And that means the virus is going to be there. So there is no strict liability as far as I know for a situation like this. What a park, if they were to get sued because somebody got sick and they say they got sick because they visited a particular park or FEC, you know, they have a pretty tall burden to satisfy, which is A, the park didn't do what they needed to do to protect that guest, and B, even if that's true, that the guest caught the virus there. Now, I don't know how you even prove the second point. I mean, I think that's a real uphill battle. But as to the first point, all the stuff that we've been talking about is really important, because you have to take reasonable steps to protect your guests from known hazards. And I think all the hand washing stations people are installing, the increased sanitizers, the distancing markers on the ground, temperature checks, health screening questions, increased staff levels to help make sure that people are staying apart, all the food and beverage modifications that are being done with mobile ordering and spacing tables, all of that just goes to the reasonableness of the steps you're taking to protect your guests. And that's really all we can do. We can't eliminate the virus, but we can do what's reasonable to meet the CDC recommendations. And one of the things that I'm so proud of our industry for is, as you go through the CDC recommendations, I challenge you to find one that we cannot meet or in most cases exceed. The creative thinking that has come out of the industry over the last 2 months has been amazing to me. And I'm really proud to be a part of that team that has kind of said, you know what, this is not how we've ever operated before, but we can do it. Let's figure it out. And we did. Now we just have to convince, people in power to allow us to reopen.
Erik, do you recommend, kind of along those lines? I know that Disney had put out a statement very much like what Josh just said, right? Before you come here, you are, taking a risk. Do you recommend other parks kind of try to get ahead of that with that kind of language?
Yes, but only from a communication standpoint. I'm not, this kind of gets into waiver territory, and I'm not a huge fan of waivers, because I think in a lot of states, like for example, in Connecticut, there was a Supreme Court case about 15 years ago that essentially held waivers are just not enforceable. And since then, I'm not aware of any waiver in the entire state that's ever been upheld in a court. So waivers are not generally the be all and end all of protecting yourself. But from a communication standpoint, yes, I think those kinds of signs that say, look, here are the steps we're taking. We cannot eliminate the virus. You are taking your own risk in coming to the park. Those kinds of statements may be helpful in setting guest expectations, so that hopefully if they are very nervous about coming, maybe they choose to wait. We're going to have reduced attendance anyway. An amusement park has never been a place where you have to go. And if you're not comfortable, then wait it out a year. Come back in 2021 when hopefully things are a little more normal and you can feel a little more comfortable. You guys know we want our guests to be comfortable in the facility and to have a good time. We don't want them to have to be constantly nervous and stressed out about whether they're, going to land in the hospital in a week. So if that's where their mindset is, those kinds of communications can help people self-select out of what activities they want to do.
Sure. And then if that happens, we can anticipate, in addition to capacity restrictions, that there will likely be some form of attendance decline across the board within the industry. But with that said, kind of going back to now the reassurance and kind of regaining confidence, you posted an amazing article just a few days or so ago that was, I think it was 13 reasons why you should feel safe visiting an amusement park this summer. And one of the points that you made at the very beginning of it was that amusement parks or theme parks or large attractions are not mass gatherings. Can you expand on that statement?
Yeah, because this is something we're running into this as I've helped people talk to their state and local authorities. We're running into this all over the place, which is people who don't know our industry very well, who have never operated a park, they just kind of lump us in with sporting events and huge concerts and things like that. And one of the things that we've really worked hard to kind of communicate as part of our reopening plans is that's really a false equivalency. When you go to a baseball stadium or a football stadium that can hold 70,000 people in it, think about the square footage or the acreage that's available for those people. And Look, I love going to Fenway Park. It's one of my favorite places to watch a baseball game, but it's an old facility. It's been around for 100 years. When you're in there, you are jammed in there. It's a sellout every night. People are 6 inches away from you at most sometimes. That is very different than an amusement park environment that may have 100 acres, 200 acres to work with. You're putting the same amount of people in the event, but at an amusement park, you can spread them out like crazy, where you can't do that at a baseball stadium or a football stadium or a concert arena. So I think trying to get that point across is really important. And that's why one of the things that I've really been focusing on in talking with clients and in talking with state and local authorities is the concept of getting away from talking about capacity. I don't really like talking about capacity, because capacity just kind of connotes that we're trying to jam as many people as we can into a certain place. What I'm more in favor of is trying to talk about density. How much space are the people that are going to be there allowed in? And to kind of, put a ridiculous point on it, if somebody were to say, well, can you hold an event that would hold, 4 million people? Well, that depends on how big the space is, right? I mean, Boston has 4 million people, and nobody's suggesting we shut down the city of Boston. It's because there's plenty of space and ways to space those people out so that they're hopefully safe within the city limits. Well, the same thing for an amusement park. Can we put 50,000 people in? Probably not right now. We wouldn't want to. But if you have enough space, yeah, you could. If you have the square footage that's available to guests, and you're careful about how you calculate that square footage so that if rides go down, if you get a rainstorm or power failure and everybody ends up on the midway, they still have enough space. They still have places to be where they're not going to be shoulder to shoulder with people.
And Erik, when you talk about that density, a lot of that is going to fall to, the responsibility of the guest, but also to the frontline team members, right? To maybe, help provide that guidance to them. So what are some of the things that you are helping your clients or even the industry with how to have those conversations and what the responsibility should be? And, are people taking a hard line with the social distancing, or is it more of a guideline? Or does that even, change based on when that park opens and what the new guidelines are? There's a lot of questions in there, but I'm curious about your.
Yeah. Well, and you made a great point there at the end, especially, which is things change day to day on this. One of the things we've been doing in our coffee chats is every week we do an update of the things that we've talked about in the past week, because literally information that we presented a week ago may be completely out of date by the time we come to our next coffee chat. So it is really important to kind of keep track of that, and also to know what may be peculiar to your jurisdiction, your state, your city. If you're in the middle of a hot spot, that may change your approach as to whether you're in a very rural area that doesn't have an outbreak. But I think with respect to your point about frontline people, they are going to be important. And what we've been trying to help our clients with right now is saying, look, we need to, this is a time for really great guest service more than ever. This is a sensitive topic. But spacing and distancing cannot just be a guideline right now. It has to be the actual practice. Right. The best way to encourage spread of the virus, and B, get yourself shut down, is going to be to tell everybody you're doing all these wonderful things and then not do them. You have to do what you say you're going to do. That's the only way it works. So the guidance we're giving is, look, be tactful, be nice. People still want you to be nice, even if you're enforcing a rule. But also this may be a situation where you need to listen to the guest and not be afraid to elevate it to your management quicker than maybe you normally would, especially if you start hearing some buzzwords that we're kind of worried about. Like, you start hearing somebody talk about the Constitution, talk about freedom, talk about their rights. Those are the kinds of things that most 16-year-olds are just they're not trained to deal with it. We don't need to train them to deal with it. Elevate that to management and let somebody who understands that issue better kind of take the reins at that point and walk on. I am somewhat hopeful that we're not going to have tremendous problems with that, though. I think kind of anecdotally, we had Kyle Allison last week from Oklahoma, who has a bowling facility there that has reopened. Oklahoma is a very conservative state. but he reported most people are cooperating. They're doing what they were asked to do. And if they don't want to comply, they just don't come, which is okay. That's fine. And I also think for your bigger facilities, if you're going to go to a big park that's going to cost you $75 or $100 a person to get in, I don't know why you pay that money just to go in and fight about the policy all day. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You want to complain about CVS or the grocery store or something like that because you have to go there, that's a different story. But I don't see a lot of people kind of wasting their time, raising a ruckus at the front gate of some amusement park after they've paid all the money to get in.
Yeah. I did see a video, I think it was on Twitter first, where there was a woman who was saying those exact buzzwords. I've got a right to come in here without a mask, and I've got a medical condition. And I don't know if you saw that one. That was the one where as the manager was getting some information, there was a guy that had, kind of the greeter, and he was out there and he's just being as pleasant as can be. He's wiping down the carriage, and he's kind of dancing around and doing it. And he kind of wins her over with kindness. But I think it's a really good point to listen for those buzzwords, because that's someone who probably came to the park with an agenda.
Yeah.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but I think you're right. I think most people, if they're going to want to venture out, they're going to want to have a good time.
Yeah. I think, look, we're going to have to be careful about our attendance. We have to do realistic things to cap our attendance so that we don't get unexpected runs on the park that would overwhelm the spacing requirements. That's super important. But the fact remains, people want to get out of their houses right now. People want to go and have a good time. They want to be around other people, even if they can't be super close to them. I live in Connecticut. We are the very last state to reopen. We are just today finally allowing some businesses to reopen, and all over the local Facebook pages. I mean, it's people who can't wait to go back to their favorite restaurant and just sit outside 6 feet away from the table next to them and have a drink and a good meal. I think we're going to see the same thing when we reopen. The people who are comfortable coming out, who really want to have a good time, they will come. And I think they will be appreciative of our efforts to keep them safe.
Yeah. And I think that's a great note to end on as a nice capstone. That we predicted a couple of months ago that the optimists are saying there's going to be this pent up demand. That was when we thought we were going to be closed for 2 weeks and everything was going to reopen April 1st, and then now hopefully that demand has only had the time to just continue to build. So Erik, any final lasting thoughts or words?
Well, the only final thing I want to thank Matt for something that I'm going to see if he even knows what I'm talking about here, but Matt made an everlasting concontribution to international ride training, and I'm going to take partial credit because I was there when this happened.
Las Vegas.
Okay, so you do know what I'm talking about. So every year we have a conference that we hold, and for our ride operation certification program. And what was it, about 6 or 7 years ago, right?
It was quite a few, because you and I were both there, I think, guest speaking.
Yes, we were both there guest speaking, and I think it was our first time for both of us there. And we sat in the back of the room for 4 days, listened to all the guest speakers. And Matt, what observation did you make about that event?
I said, this is kind of like camp for ride operators. This is like ride camp.
That came from you.
And from that moment forward, Matt and I just jokingly referred to it as ride camp. And then 3 years ago, when I joined IRT, I said to my partner, Cindy, when we were looking for a theme, I said, I have a theme. It's perfect. Matt Heller nailed it. And Ride Camp was born. And now, Matt, just so you know, it is at least the foreseeable future, it will always be Ride Camp. It's that theme just fits perfectly. And in fact, Josh was able to join us as one of our speakers this year. So, thank you for coming, Josh and Matt. Too bad we didn't capitalize on that monetarily or anything.
Well, I am just glad that that name landed in a great spot with great people. And, every time I see you guys put that on social media, Ride Camp's coming up, there's a little flutter in my heart. So
there you go.
No, I love it. Thank you for bringing that up.
I didn't realize that came from you. And I got to say, having it kind of branded as Ride Camp, like when I did come to speak at it, I didn't feel like I was at a conference. And I mean that like in a good way. Like, I guess kind of when you break down the nuts and bolts of it, yeah, it had kind of all those components of a conference, but I felt like I was coming to camp, which was cool. Except I was walking around looking where the Big Bear Lodge was.
Yeah, we get a little creative in trying to name our areas of the conference center. So Big Bear Lodge was just a big room in the conference.
I was like, is this real or
what am I looking for? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. We are everlastingly or forever in your debt for that. So.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Least I could do.
Erik, thanks so much for your time today, and until we can get back to Ride Camp, we can't wait to see you in real life again, whether it's at IAPA or any other conference. But stay safe and stay healthy.
Thanks. Well, same to both of you.